In previous sessions, we discussed the while and do-while loop, which will keep on looping until a certain condition is met. There's also a requirement for a certain looping structure where you will loop it for a given amount of times. For example, if I want to loop for 10 times or 20 times, of course, you can set up a counter and count the execution time, increment the counter inside the looping body every time, and using while, do while to achieve this goal. Java also provides a looping structure called for loop for this task. The for loop is a pre-test loop. It allows the programmer to initialize a control variable or a counter in our case, test a condition, like how much is the counter's value right now, and modify the control variable, all in one line of code. The loop structure, the for loop takes a form starting with a for keyword, followed by a parenthesis, as well as a set of statement block. It will initialize itself first. Initialize the counter, for example. Have a test Boolean expression and update itself every time after the statement is executed. So this is the structure of loops of a for loop. There's actually an initialization right before we enter this loop, in which we will initialize the control variable right here. Then we will test the Boolean expression to see whether it's true or not. If the Boolean expression is true, then we can go into the statement, run the statement, finish that, and run the update. Usually it's the increment of the control variable. Then go back to check the Boolean expression again. If it's true, then do the statement again. Otherwise, we will exit the for statement. Let's take a quick look at the example. So here, we have a class called square, which will print out the square value of a number from 1 to 10. What it does, you can see that number 1 square is 1, 2 square is 4, 3, 4, 5, all the way till 10. So in this for loop, we initialize the number first. Set number equals to 1. Then, after initialization, we will check whether the number is less than or equal to 10. And for 1, of course, the Boolean expression is false. So we will execute this statement, get the number 1, print out the number 1 and the square. Then we will finish this statement and run the update statement. The update statement will increment number by 1. 1 plus 1 equals to 2. So it's still less than and equals to 10. And we will run this block again, print out 2 and 4, then go back to number plus plus, making number 3. Then we will do the same thing, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way until 10. After we print out 10 and its square, the number will increment again from 10 to 11. And this time, number is not less than or equal to 10. So we will exit outside of 4 and finish the execution. So this is the most common usage and the most basic usage of for loop. You give a start value, you give an end value, and let the statements run for the given amount of time, which is between the start value and end value. Okay. So let's dig a little bit deeper into for loop. The initialization section of the for loop allows the loop to initialize its own control variable, right? And in fact, this is not the most common way of writing a for loop. The most common way of writing a for loop is to initialize and is define and initialize the variable inside this initialization section. The key here is once this is defined this way, then the variable number will only be available inside the for loop, which actually works in most of the scenario. You don't care what things are happening after the loop, right? You don't care what is happening inside the loop after the loop is over. So you will define the integer here and start the loop by defining and initializing the variable. The test section of the for statement acts in the same manner as the condition section of a while loop. And the update section of the for loop is the last thing to execute at the end of each loop, even after the loop. Even after the statement block. And the initialization section of a for loop is optional. However, it's usually provided. And usually when you define the variable, you will define it in the initialization part, defining the counter, Typically, for loop, initialize a counter that will be tested by the test session of a loop, as we can see here, and updated by the update session. As we can see here, we initialize the counter, test the counter, and use update to increment it. The initialization section can initialize multiple variables, and variables declared in the session have scope only for the for loop. The number we define here is only active inside this. Outside of this for loop, if I try to reference number, you will see an error and says this name number cannot be resolved. It's not defined anywhere. The update expression is usually used to increment or decrement the counter variable declared in the initialization section of a for loop. The update section of the loop executes last in the loop, and the update section may update multiple variables. And each variable update is executed as if it won't align by itself. So right here is an example. The for loop may initialize and update multiple variables. You can initialize two variables and update both or all of them, which will not affect the test. Note that the only, when I say not affect the test, I mean whatever you update and whatever you test can be different, can be totally different. You can see here, you have a I and j updated, and you're testing I and j, but you can also have I here only. You don't need to have j condition, or you can only have j condition and without I condition. So whatever you define in the update section may not be the complete testing system. By doing this, you can separate test and do more in the update session. Note that the only part for loop that are mandatory are the semicolons. For example, the following for statement is a valid statement in Java. You can copy and paste it into Java code, Eclipse, and it works just fine. However, if left out, the test section defaults to true. This part will default to true, which means the for loop will be executed forever unless you have some way of exiting inside these statements, like the system.exit we had before. You should avoid, we mentioned that you can update, you can run some code in the update that has nothing to do with test, right? However, you should avoid updating the control variable of for loop within the body of a loop. The idea is once you update the variable inside the loop, it will be, your update logic will have two places of happening, and it can be confusing. The update section should be used to update the control variable. That's the only place where you should update the control variable. If you update the control variable in the for loop, your code will be hard to maintain and hard to understand and difficult to debug.